There is only one mortal in all of Greek mythology who walked into the land of the dead alive and walked back out again. And he did it not with a sword or a shield, but with a song. This is the story of the only love strong enough to move the rulers of the underworld to tears, and the single moment of doubt that undid it completely at the very last possible step. This is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. If you enjoy stories like this one, just like Stephanie here does, hi Stephanie, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. Orpheus is born in Thrace, a wild and mountainous region at the northern edge of the Greek world, thick with dense forest and cut through by rivers that run cold even in summer. He is the son of King Oeagrus and Calliope, muse of epic poetry, a lineage that gives him, from the very moment of his birth, an ear and a voice unlike any other mortal who has ever lived. Even as a small child, sound arranges itself differently for him than it does for everyone else around him. Melodies arrive fully formed in his mind, the way ordinary thoughts arrive in someone else's, as though he was simply born already knowing music the rest of the world spends a lifetime trying to learn. Apollo, god of music and prophecy, notices him early, drawn by a talent too extraordinary to leave untrained even in a mortal child. Apollo becomes his teacher, guiding him through years of instruction no ordinary musician could survive without collapsing under the weight of it, and eventually gifts him a golden lyre, strung with strings no mortal craftsman anywhere in Greece could ever hope to reproduce. Under Apollo's careful guidance, Orpheus's playing becomes something closer to magic than music. Wild animals abandon their hunts mid-chase simply to listen. Rivers slow their current, the water itself seeming to hold its breath to hear him more clearly. Trees are said to uproot themselves slowly and lean toward the sound, branches bending in a direction no wind could ever explain. Even stones, according to those who claim to have witnessed it firsthand, shift slightly in place the moment his lyre begins to play, as though something inside even solid rock responds to what he creates. It is this gift, far more than his royal blood, that comes to define him throughout Thrace and well beyond its borders. He is not a warrior, not a king in his own right, not a figure of physical strength in the way so many heroes of this era of mythology are remembered and celebrated. He is something rarer and in its own way more powerful, a mortal capable of moving the entire natural world through sound alone, a gift that will, before this story reaches its end, take him somewhere no other living mortal in the history of the world has ever gone and returned from. Eurydice is a dryad, a wood nymph bound permanently to the forest of Thrace. Her very presence tied to the health, growth and beauty of the trees she moves silently among each day. When she and Orpheus meet, drawn together in a forest clearing where his music happens to be playing, the attraction between them is immediate and entirely complete. His music drawing her the way it draws every living thing within earshot. Though what grows steadily between them in the weeks that follow is something far deeper than the simple pull of a song. They fall in love slowly, deliberately, in the unhurried way that only two people with no reason to rush ever really manage. They marry in a forest clearing not far from where they first met, surrounded by the very same trees Eurydice has spent her entire existence living among, each one seeming in its own quiet way to lean slightly closer for the ceremony. Orpheus's lyre provides the only music the wedding needs, and By every account, no wedding before or since has ever sounded quite like it. Their happiness does not last the day. Aristaeus, a minor god associated with shepherding and the careful keeping of bees, has noticed Eurydice long before this wedding, and his interest in her has never once been welcome, no matter how clearly she has made that known to him. On this same day, while the wedding celebration continues elsewhere among the trees, Aristaeus corners her alone at the clearing's edge, pursuing her with an intent she wants absolutely no part of. Eurydice runs from him through the tangled undergrowth, choosing flight over confrontation, giving herself no time at all to watch carefully where her feet land in the dense, root-covered forest floor beneath her. She steps directly onto a venomous serpent hidden, coiled in the tall grass. The bite is immediate and merciless, and by the time anyone reaches her, drawn by whatever sound escapes her, it is already far too late to save her life. Orpheus's grief, when he finally finds her, is total and consuming in a way nothing in his life has ever prepared him for. The same voice that can calm wild animals and slow entire rivers cannot undo what has already irreversibly happened. For the very first time in his life, his extraordinary gift is powerless against something standing directly in front of him. And it is precisely that unfamiliar powerlessness that drives him, in the days that follow, toward a decision no mortal before him has ever seriously attempted. Orpheus decides with a certainty that frightens even those closest to him, that he will go to the underworld himself and ask for Eurydice back directly. Not through prayer offered from a safe distance, not through sacrifice left on some distant altar, but by walking down into the realm of the dead while he is still fully, completely alive, a feat no mortal in the entire history of the world has ever managed to survive. He finds the hidden entrance where the living world gives way entirely to the world below, a dark, narrow opening in the earth. Near a cave most travellers avoid on instinct alone, cold air rising steadily from somewhere far beneath it, and begins his descent, Lyre held close against his chest, with no real plan beyond the one thing he has always had and always trusted completely. His music. The passage downward grows darker with every step, the air thickening and turning colder the further he descends until the last traces of daylight behind him disappear entirely, and the only light remaining comes from some pale, colourless source he can never quite locate. Cerberus, the massive, three-headed hound guarding the gates of the underworld, blocks his path exactly as it has blocked every single soul, living or dead, that has ever attempted to pass without permission, granted from above. Orpheus does not fight it, and does not attempt to slip past it unseen in the darkness. He plays instead. The same song that calms wild animals under open sky calms even this. Cerberus's three heads grow still one by one, its usual ferocity dissolving slowly into something closer to a hound settling calmly by a fire after a long day, and Orpheus walks quietly through the very gates it exists specifically to guard. Further along the dark path, he reaches the river that divides the world of the living from the true, final depths of the underworld. Its water black and utterly silent, no current visible on its surface at all. Charon, the ferryman, charges every single soul a single coin for passage across, refusing outright anyone who cannot pay the price, exactly as he has done, without exception, since the underworld itself first came into being. Orpheus has no coin to offer. The dead are buried with one specifically for this exact purpose, and he, still breathing, still warm, is not among the dead. He plays again instead, and Charon, who has ferried countless thousands of silent souls across this same water for as long as anyone can remember, finds himself carrying a living, breathing man across without ever once demanding the payment he has never before waived for anyone. Orpheus finally reaches the great hall where Hades and Persephone rule together over the dead, and there, standing before the two most powerful beings in the entire underworld, he plays his plea rather than attempting to speak it aloud. A song of loss, so complete, so raw, and so unguarded that it fills the entire hall from floor to ceiling, describing in music everything that mere words alone could never fully carry or contain. Persephone listens differently than any other soul who has ever stood in that same hall pleading for something impossible. Long before she ever became queen of this underworld, she was taken from a sunlit meadow above ground and separated completely from her mother, who grieved so deeply that the whole earth turned cold and barren until an exception was carved out, allowing Persephone to return to the surface for part of every year. She knows, in a way almost no other being in existence could fully understand, exactly what it means to be pulled away from someone you love through no choice or fault of your own, and exactly what it means to have that separation only partially undone through mercy freely given, rather than through anything strictly owed. Orpheus's song, describing a loss so similar in shape to her own, lands somewhere inside her that few pleas, however desperate, ever manage to reach. She turns to Hades beside her, and for the first time in the long, unbroken history of his rule over the dead, he finds himself genuinely moved to grant something he has never once granted before to anyone. Hades agrees to release Eurydice, but on a single condition, absolute and entirely unbending. Orpheus must walk ahead of her on the long journey back to the surface, and he must not look back to confirm she is truly following behind him, not once, until both of them have fully left the underworld and stand once again beneath open sky. If he looks back even one moment too soon, before that condition is completely satisfied, she will be lost to the underworld permanently, with no second chance offered and no further mercy left to ask for, from him or from anyone else. The climb back toward the surface is long, dark, and almost entirely silent, the path winding upward through narrow stone passages that seem, at times, to stretch on longer than the descent ever did. Orpheus walks ahead exactly as instructed, straining the entire way to hear footsteps behind him that never quite sound certain enough to fully trust, muffled by stone and distance and his own racing heartbeat. The path curves steadily upward, lit by nothing but a distant, promised daylight still far ahead of them both, and with every single step forward, the silence behind him seems to grow heavier rather than lighter, pressing in against his resolve. Doubt creeps in exactly the way doubt always eventually does, quietly, reasonably, disguised carefully as caution rather than as fear. Is she truly there behind him, matching his pace, step for step? Did Hades's condition hide some trick he failed entirely to notice in the moment it was given? Has the entire path, all along, been some kind of test? He is currently failing without any possible way of knowing it until it's already too late. The longer the climb continues without any real proof that Eurydice is actually there behind him, the more genuinely unbearable that uncertainty becomes with every passing minute. He reaches at last the very edge of the underworld, close enough now that the first true daylight in what must feel like months to Eurydice begins to touch his own face and hands, close enough that safety feels, for just a moment, essentially certain and within reach. And in that last fragile moment, so impossibly close to the one condition being fully and completely satisfied, Orpheus turns his head to look. He is not yet fully standing in the world above. Eurydice is not yet fully out of the underworld behind him. The condition, unmet by the smallest possible margin imaginable, breaks completely and instantly. Eurydice is pulled backward into the dark once more, her final word to him not anger, but only a soft, resigned farewell, and the underworld closes around her one final time, this time with no further exception left anywhere to ask for. Orpheus tries immediately to follow her back down into the dark, desperate for a second chance that Charon this time refuses outright to grant him, regardless of how beautifully or how desperately he plays. Days pass at the entrance to the underworld, Orpheus playing every song he knows toward a door that no longer opens for him, until even he understands with a finality he cannot argue with that the underworld's mercy was never truly meant to be given twice to the same soul. No matter how genuine the grief behind the second request, he returns to the world above entirely alone, and never fully recovers from what he's lost. He wanders the forests and mountains of Thrace for years afterward, his music now carrying a grief so complete and so unguarded that it becomes in its own strange way as powerful as it ever was in joy. Animals still gather to listen, but where they once gathered in wonder, they now seem to gather in something closer to mourning alongside him, drawn less by beauty than by recognition of a sorrow large enough to match their own instincts for loss. He rejects every woman who approaches him in the years that follow, entirely unwilling to replace what he has lost with anything he considers lesser. A devotion some read as beautiful and tragic in equal measure, and others, particularly the Maenads, frenzied female followers of the god Dionysus, known throughout Greece for wild ecstatic rites held in his honour, often involving music, dance, and a loss of ordinary restraint, read instead as a personal insult to their own repeated advances toward him. During one of their rites, resentful of his continued rejection and swept fully into the frenzy the god Dionysus himself is known to inspire in his most devoted followers, the Maenads turn on Orpheus without warning. His music, which has calmed rivers and stones and even the guardian of the underworld itself, fails him now against something that will not be reasoned with. They tear him apart, ending in sudden and brutal violence the life of the one mortal who once moved the underworld itself to genuine mercy. There is a small, quiet mercy buried at the very end of this story, easy to miss entirely if it moves too quickly past it. In death, Orpheus finally returns to the underworld once more. Not as a living visitor bound by conditions this time, but as a soul among countless other souls, free at last to search for Eurydice without any further trial or test standing between them. And there, finally, the two of them are reunited permanently, walking side by side through the very same underworld that once demanded he never look back, this time with no threshold left, anywhere to cross, and nothing left in existence that could ever separate them again. His lyre, some say, was placed carefully among the stars by gods who genuinely mourned his loss, visible still today on a clear night as the small constellation Lyre. A permanent, quiet reminder that somewhere once a single mortal's music was powerful enough to move even death itself to tears, if only for a little while. It is perhaps the most human detail in the entire story. Not that he failed at the very last step, but that he came close enough to succeeding to make the failure unbearable. Every telling of this myth across thousands of years has kept that same single detail intact, not the strength of his music, remarkable as it was, but the ordinary, understandable doubt that undid it. A doubt anyone who has ever loved someone deeply enough to fear losing them would likely recognise in themselves. If you enjoy stories like this one, subscribe to Mythology and Legends and turn on the notification bell so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. Which myth would you like told next? Leave it in the comments below. Thank you for listening to the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice, and we'll see you again soon.